So there's something I want you to know. There are two major mistakes that most people make, and I'm not exaggerating when I say probably most people on the planet make that have a huge impact on your mental health. So in this video, I want to teach you what these two mistakes are so you can start to correct them right away because I guarantee you they negatively impact your mental health and they massively get in your way for your ability to heal or grow or transform or uplevel your life effectively. So you're going to want to know what these are. So please join me. Okay, so I'm going to cut to the chase here because I want to make some short form videos. I want to give you solid content. So that's my intention here with this video. So I'm going to tell you what the two mistakes are. We'll unpack each one a little bit. That'll be the video. Okay, so the two mistakes are confusing yourself and your thoughts, not knowing the difference between your thoughts and your sense of self, who you actually are, and also confusing your emotions and your sense of self. These are the two major mistakes. So let me explain to you a little bit about how getting confused about these things can massively impact your mental health for the worse. So let's start with confusing thoughts and self. So one of the most common places that my clients are stuck when they come to me and where I need to kind of help them first is in separating out their sense of self from their thoughts, right? So here's the thing I want you to really understand. It's actually very simple. Your brain has the capacity to just spit out autopilot thoughts without you even trying. And the way you can prove this really easily is sit down, set a timer for 5 minutes or 10 minutes, and meditate and try to just still yourself and to sit and be present with what's happening in your body. And what you'll notice almost immediately is that even though you're not identified with or trying to identify with the thoughts that are rising, there will be a constant stream of bubbling up thoughts, concerns, fears, needs, processes, ruminations, etc. Like on and on and on it goes, right? So I want you to get your brain has a capacity for auto thought. It just does. It's just part of how we're wired. Where these auto thoughts come from, that's kind of a whole other question, but obviously some of that's conditioning. Some of that is kind of, it's like the working RAM in a computer where it's just the active things you've been thinking about recently and chewing on and figuring out and processing. It's also just you've habituated yourself to overthinking, right? We live in a data environment now. We live with this online world where we're constantly bombarded with things to think about and process. And so we do. So it's really important for you to get that your body and your brain naturally has this auto thinking capacity. It's always been there. It's part of how you're wired up. It's actually a normal part of being a human being. But because of that, it's really important to understand that some of the thoughts that bubble up inside of you aren't originating from your intention to think. They're not part of uh, authentic thinking, right? They are things that just bubble up in you, right? Have you ever just suddenly had a memory of a song lyric bubble up in you, or suddenly had a commercial like a jingle bubble up in you, or a random word that you recently read in an article or heard someone say? It's like, this is what the mind does. It's really important for you to understand you are not your thoughts, even the ones you think intentionally. You are the thinker of the thoughts. You are the space, you are the environment of awareness and attention and consciousness inside which those thoughts can arise in the first place. You are the container, and you are also the one who's capable of leading those thoughts, steering those thoughts, not responding to those thoughts. This is a big one. Or, identifying with certain thoughts, not identifying with other thoughts, right? And it's really important for you to begin to access a clear understanding of the distinction between the thoughts and being the owner or the container within within which the thoughts arise. So you are the owner of the thoughts. You are the generator of the thoughts. You're the creator of the thoughts, but you are not your thoughts. Now, where this really becomes a problem in, say, the coaching work that I do, or, in a psychedelic therapy session, or when people are in therapy, is that if we identify with every thought that comes up in our head in a given day or in a given moment, surely some of the thoughts that are going to bubble up in you are going to be shallow, gross, judgmental, rude, shameful, mean, inappropriate, et cetera, right? Now, some of that might be coming from a genuine place in you, but oftentimes a lot of that, again, is just conditioning or reactivity or just a mind that's just wild. And if you can't separate that out, then you start to take all of it personally, that this is me, right? That I am all of these terrible things I think, that I am all these terrible things that, cross through my awareness, right? But you are not. You're the owner of those things. And you can choose not to agree with certain thoughts that move through your head, right? So what I see a lot with people is they'll start thinking some shame-based thought or some guilt-based thought, or they will start thinking some piece of social conditioning that causes them pain, but they don't know how to unhook from, right? This kind of a thing. And then they get all messed up because then it's proof that they're broken because they're thinking a messed up thought, right? Understand that you are not your thoughts. It's really that simple. Okay. You need to start making this distinction. You need to start separating yourself. Like I said, a few moments ago, I think the best way to do this is meditation, but you can also just use observation or inquiry, which are meditation techniques, to do the same thing. Right. So you can look at your own thoughts and go, is that really true? Do I totally agree with that? What part of me resonates with that? What part of me doesn't resonate with that? Right. So that would be inquiry. We could simply observe the thought without reacting to it. Just go, oh, that's interesting. Oh, suddenly I have a commercial jingle in my head. Well, that's interesting. Right. And not really hold on to it. Just let it kind of slide right through like all the other stuff. Right. So that's the first one. So this is a major, major, major place to work at and develop this distinction that will improve your mental health, right? Because if you're aware that you are not necessarily all the thoughts that move through you, right? That a lot of that might be conditioning, a lot of that might just be repetition, a lot of that might be priming and all this other stuff. If you're aware of that, it gives you choice. But if you're not aware of that, then you are terrified and horrified that you are all these things, right? I think it's really important to be clear about this distinction. Okay, so let's talk about the second one, which is confusing your emotions for who you are. So pretty much same thing applies to emotions with what I just said about thoughts. Emotions are, I think there are a lot of different ways we could describe them in different schools of therapy and different schools of personal development. They'll have different definitions for emotions. The one I personally like is that emotions are meanings that the deeper nervous system has created that are being communicated to us through the body, through the felt sense, if that makes sense, right? So emotions are meaning arising through felt sense, right? But it's really important to acknowledge a few things here. First of all, emotions are not always, the perception or the meaning that drives an emotion is not always accurate, right? So we can have a misperception and have an emotional reaction to that misperception. Suddenly I'm thinking of like me being totally spooked out at like horror films that I thought were real when I was young, right? We can have a misperception and then have a somatic emotional meaning generated from that misperception. And that big emotional meaning can be intense and overwhelming and powerful and feel very real to our nervous system. But that doesn't mean that the misperception is true or correct or accurate. I want you to get that. Okay, so that's one way that this can go sideways. Also, we can be conditioned into certain emotional responses and out of other emotional responses, right? So, depending on the culture you grew up in, where in the world you grew up in, your family culture, your friend culture, you may be conditioned into being allowed to have certain emotions, but not other emotions, right? And so sometimes people will, yeah, have you ever met a person who has the same emotional reaction to anything? Right? Like maybe it's anger towards everything, no matter what happens, their initial response is some sort of kind of anger or fear towards everything, right? This is a conditioned response, right? Just because you have the anger, have the fear, doesn't mean that that's necessarily the appropriate response or the only way you could respond to it or the accurate way to respond to it, right? The other thing to realize is that the meanings and therefore the emotions that come out of the meanings that we generate, they're ours. They exist inside of us. We are the source of them. Again, you are bigger than your emotions. You are the container in which these emotions arise. And just like thoughts, in my experience, when I've sat and meditated for a long time, or, say, taken some psilocybin and sat and reflected, you'll notice waves of emotion just move through you, almost like clouds passing through a landscape. Waves of emotion can just arise. And sometimes there's something there that needs to be addressed and some meaning and maybe some dysregulation to regulate, some, wound to heal. But sometimes it's just an emotion moving through you. It's just your body talking, right? And so this is another thing to really realize that you are not your emotions. You are the deeper awareness in which emotions arise. And making that distinction, right? Because if I am my emotions, and also, side note, sorry, ADD here, emotions are addictive. I don't know if you know that. Some of us have heard this, some of us haven't, but the neurochemistry of emotions are addictive, right? So it's easy over time, if you get used to having a certain emotion, to become addicted to it, right? I was addicted to sadness for a long time. That was kind of my go-to, was like this comfortable, deep, grieving sadness kind of state. It really like stuck in me for a long time. Other people, again, are addicted to, anger, or addicted to passion, or addicted to, fear, or addicted, et cetera, right? So keep that in mind. You are not your emotions, but you can become addicted to them and confused about that, right? I think it's tempting to want to build identity out of our felt sense of things, right? Because sometimes that felt sense points towards a deep meaning or a deep truth, whether it's about something we value or about just something we need to express that we're not expressing, something that may have been a perception we had about an experience that at a conscious level we're not registering, but our unconscious registered. So our unconscious has this like, there's something here, and there's an emotion that starts to arise, even though we don't know why. So I think emotions are useful. They're an important tool of the body and the deeper intelligence of our nervous system to communicate to us. But you are bigger than your emotions. You're more than your emotions. Your identity is more than your emotions. Your emotions are just a way that your system communicates information to you for you to work with, right? Sometimes that means that's something there that's valuable. Sometimes that means that there's just a misperception there. Sometimes that just means that something you're currently experiencing reminds you of something from the past, and that old thing needs working on, et cetera, et cetera. But I think it's really important for you to separate this out. Because again, if I am my emotions, then I can't be in control of my emotions, right? If I am my emotions, I have no distance, I have no ability to contain them, be in ownership of them, communicate about them in a mature, healthy adult way, or choose not to act on them, or choose to inquire about them, or choose to listen more closely to them, or be curious about them. None of that's possible if I am my emotion, right? So when we are our emotions, one way of looking at that would be that we are hijacked by that emotion. We are confused between the difference between self and emotion, right? So I want you to really get this distinction. Who you are, what you are, is bigger than thoughts and bigger than emotions. And if you're confused about either of those, they will really, really get in the way. Obviously, again, with emotions, you think about it. Imagine that your nervous system or your body is addicted to, or, never mind, scratch that. Think about it like this with PTSD. One of the common symptoms, especially complex PTSD, but even like just single instance PTSD, one of the common symptoms is emotional flashbacks. is your body suddenly bringing up an emotion out of nowhere, and you're like flooded with this emotion. You're like, where the heck is this coming from? Right. Now, if you are your emotion, then that's going to be crazy making, right? And you're not going to be able to work with that and heal that. You're just like, why am I doing this, right? If you are the owner and the container of your emotion, then you can start to look at, what is this signal coming from? What's it telling me? What is it inviting me to attune to and work with and heal, right? So, very important to know the distinction here. You're not your thoughts, you're not your emotions. So, I hope this clarifies things a little bit. Please don't make these mistakes. They set you back, they slow you down. Like I've said a cajillion times and a cajillion videos, and I'm sure I'll be saying until I'm blue in the face here. Um, Probably the easiest way to start to make this distinction more clear for yourself, if you're confused about it, is to start to meditate. Start to work on your prefrontal cortex. Start to work on the ability to observe, and work on your interoception. Work on your observer abilities. Start to become aware of your own body and your own nervous system, and the distinction between the phenomena that happens inside of you and who you are as a whole, or as a larger container. Right? Super important. Right? This question of identity, it's an interesting one, because I think it's another video, honestly, but most of us struggle with even knowing who we are. So we grasp for things as clues or signals of, this is me, right? But the question of identity is a deeper topic for another day. But let's just leave it now with, separate out your emotions and your thoughts from your sense of self. It'll do you so much good. Okay. Much love. Take care. I'll talk to you guys soon.